Jacksonville.com. Today's topic is going to be police and public safety in the Jacksonville journey. We're joined today with Mayor John Peyton, JFRD Chief Dan Clayman, and Deputy Chief Administrator Carrie Stewart. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
David, thank you for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about safety. This is a big part of our budget. As you know, police and fire represents about 50% of our overall general fund expenditures. And as we go through what we are describing as a financial crisis, how we invest is important. I maintain that police and fire is an area that we should not cut. When we are leading the state in violence and murder in Duval County, this is not a time to be reducing police officers. And when you talk about the fire and rescue department, you're really talking about a rescue department where 80% of our calls are rescue related. And to diminish that department would, I think, impact response time, our ability to get to you in a timely fashion should you have a medical emergency or some type of an accident. So for that reason, we're encouraging investment in these areas. We have our fire director here and also Carrie Stewart with the Jacksonville Journey. As we deal with the violent trends in our community, Jacksonville, I'm proud to say, has stepped up in the form of an investment in the program called Jacksonville Journey, which is probably the first citizen-driven, comprehensive approach to reducing crime in Jacksonville. The recommendations were made last year. Is about a $31 million expenditure to take a comprehensive approach to reducing crime. The concern is that if we do not get a handle on this problem, it will eventually impact not only our quality of life, loss of life, but also our ability to bring jobs to this county. The Jacksonville Journey, I think, is a successful program, even though it's in its infancy of implementation. And we're taking a three-prong approach. It's about prevention, which is engaging kids, particularly at-risk youth, so they're doing things that are constructive, and they're around people and organizations that can actually transfer values so they have more options and make better choices. It's also about intervention, which is about helping redirect those kids that have made bad decisions, serve their time, and trying to get them back into the workforce and into a productive contribution to our community so they don't pursue or continue pursuing a life of crime, which costs us. And I would remind you that the cost of crime is a pretty hefty number, and the cost of incarceration is even greater, $39,000 a year to incarcerate. So prevention, intervention, and the last leg of that stool is enforcement. And we are actually adding police officers to the streets of Jacksonville, trying to make sure that we are a safer community. I believe it takes all three of those to be successful. Today, we are down 22%. The murder rate is down 22% over this time last year. And while it's too soon to say it's a trend, certainly indications that we're making progress. I want to make sure during a budget crisis we do not take our foot off the gas in keeping this community safe and investing in police presence and investing in fire and rescue. That is why it puts so much burden of the budget cutting process on everything else, which I think we could argue has been unduly sacrificed in the past few years. So, David, we appreciate the opportunity and look forward to answering questions from your viewers and your readers and you as well.
Great. Well, thanks for being here. One of the issues of public safety in Jacksonville is compared to other Florida cities, despite all of the investments that you just described and we've been talking about, public safety spending is the lowest in the state, correct? And
that's right. And it's low by a significant margin. We have actually been enjoying the benefits of a JCCI study, which actually benchmarked Jacksonville in every major expenditure category. If you look at our expenditures and police presence, we're the lowest in the state, which I think is telling the fact that we lead the state in murder. We also are the lowest investment in fire and rescue, and that's 50% of our budget. Our per-person cost is the lowest. Our ratio of officers to population is low as well. So I think there comes a point where you draw a line between being fiscally conservative and responsible and cheap to being irresponsible, and you start making decisions that can impact our safety. There is no more of a fundamental service than public safety in this government. It is the bulk of what we do. It is our core business, and I'm not advocating that we trim that, and that's why I'm supporting a slight, very modest millage increase to really offset the notion of cutting services that we value. Remember, there's a three-part plan for the budget. Cut $40 million out of the existing budget, reduce the cost of government, reform the pension system, which is driving all the escalations. And there have been some that have noted, look, the only departments that are growing at City Hall is really police and fire. But when you take their budget and break it down, it's really only because you've had escalations in pension and escalations in health care costs. If you take those out, you have organizations that have been virtually flat, other than the 40 officers we're adding to the Sheriff's Department at the Journey recommendation. So the notion that we've been growing this department at an unprecedented rate is just not right. What's been growing is the employee-related expenses, primarily healthcare and pension.
So some would say that the departments have not grown enough. The number of officers compared to the number of citizens in Jacksonville as the city's grown over the last decade. Has there been any studies, any look at a need to put more officers on the streets, and what have you guys done?
You know, we actually had a company come in. I think it was 2 years ago, actually, called Matrix. They're one of the premier auditors of public safety functions in governments across the country. They came in, set up shop, and did a very thorough audit. The report is about that thick. And I think the teachings from that report are numerous. There was certainly, they said we needed more correction officers to reduce the overtime burden, which we're doing, and that is reducing overtime because we have fixed post positions that, quite frankly, we're better served with full-time positions. They said we were shy on detectives, but overall, they said, look, as sheriff's departments go, this was probably one of the best managed, best organized departments they'd seen in the country. We have the benefit of a consolidated government, which makes that possible. And I think we have a competent sheriff. So all that being said, there were no aha moments of things that were being mismanaged or resources that weren't being allocated properly. Having said that, we are still low. I mean, we're the lowest in the state. And you would think in a city that has the highest murder rate of the 67 counties in Florida, our ratio would be better. And it's just a lack of resources. It costs about $100,000 a year to put a police officer on the street. There's training costs, there's fuel costs, cars, guns, equipment. That's an expensive ticket. But frankly, we could probably add 200 officers tomorrow and still be the lowest in the state.
How does it get to that? Is it something that's just kind of in the budgetary culture, the culture at City Hall here? How did we get to be the lowest in the state?
Well, I think when you look at our millage rate, we haven't increased the millage rate in 17 years, so we've either been flat or actually gone down. You combine that with the reform coming out of tax reform out of Tallahassee that took about $100 million out of our coffers at City Hall. You combine that with a recession, which is a $30 million hit, and then a pension that's escalating out of control. That's really the perfect storm of bad things that have happened that have led to us really not having the resources over time. So my proposal only, by the way, gives a status quo. It does not do much more than status quo. It does continue to fund Journey, which has a program for adding officers over time. And we hope we get COPS grant money from the federal government to do that. But outside of that, there's really been the only growth we've seen is pension and health care costs.
Mm-hmm. The other day when Finance Committee had voted against the idea of increasing the millage to balance the budget, from your vantage point, what sort of suspicions, fears, what have you, did that put in you about public safety in next year's budget?
Well, first of all, I don't think the Finance Committee represents the council of the whole. I think you have a committee that has been organized in such a manner that is anti-anything almost. So this decision is too great for a council recommendation just from a committee. I think the full council will weigh it in its entirety. So I'm not sure that the council action is any precursor for future votes. Number one. Number two, my experience tells me that when we take this budget apart and council members start to digest it, as I have, and they recognize there are consequences with cuts that may be considered, I hope they end up in a similar place that I'm in. I don't where I have landed is on an arbitrary place. It's after having seen the impacts and the facts related to this budget and the dire circumstances we face. So I'm optimistic. This is early in the process. They've just gotten the budget. I've been noodling it for months, and I have confidence. I have confidence that when they look at it the way we have, an in-depth analysis, we'll end up in similar places. That's certainly my hope.
We have heard from a lot of people that do have it, and we've talked about this attitude before, the idea of government being bad, it should be starved, that we should drive on dirt roads. How does that reflect when we talk about public safety spending? It doesn't seem as often that people want to come out and say we need fewer police, we need fewer fire engines, or have you heard that?
Well, listen, I think there are people that think we could streamline any operation, and listen, we try to, and I think we have a sheriff that pursues finding better processes. But at the end of the day, it's how many officers you have for a population and how you're using those resources. And we've been doing it on the cheap. If you look at our city comparisons to cities in Florida and even outside of Florida, we are operating the cheapest sheriff's department and the cheapest rescue department by a large margin. And so you ask yourself, is there a relationship to our murder rate to lack of officers? There very well could be.
One of the parts of there being the cheapest departments in Florida, looking at our pension issue, in a lot of municipal cultures that for the longest time it's been you take these public service jobs because you'll be taken care of when you retire. And with these departments being the cheapest in the state, does that put a value on our pension even though the pension costs have escalated?
I think in the early days, the lack of salary was offset by a pension. That is no longer the case. I think our salaries are competitive. We're in an environment where people are lucky to have a job. So the beefed up pension package probably is not offsetting a lack of salary. In this day and age, we cannot afford to offer a pension program that no other American can get. We have to reset the clock. And I've put a proposal on the table that will be negotiated during collective bargaining that I think not only saves the taxpayer about $1.3 billion over the next 30 years, but also provides a fair and competitive program for the people that work for this government. And we have to take a hard look at what is sustainable. The 8.4 guaranteed rate of return has got to be reconsidered. The cost of living adjustments, the employee contribution, the average pay calculation, the retirement age calculation, the spousal benefits, all these things have got to be revisited. And my thinking is I'm hopeful the unions will sign the deal that's on the table because I can say with great certainty failure to sign this deal will put the existing employees in a position where they probably will not have the benefits they've come to work with. And my sense is that council will not be as lenient as I have been should they not accept this deal, and they will go after existing employees and reset the clock for people that work for this government today.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned a deal on the table. I understand that there was a presentation to the finances or the Pension Sustainability Committee yesterday. And what was that presentation?
Well, actually, the most recent interaction I've had on this topic was during a SHADE meeting where I met with city council members during the SHADE, which is by law we're allowed to meet confidentially with our lawyers without any presence of the media or any recorded notes because we discuss strategy. And that is where I got my very real sense that this council is very serious about pension reform. And if anything, they want to do more, not less. And I think failure to sign the deal that's on the table, quite frankly, will reset. My program basically grandfathers in existing employees, which I think is the right thing to do. But failure to accept this deal, I think, changes the ballgame. And I hope that the leaderships of the union are in step with their membership, because they could very well put their current members at risk with a plan that is unlike what they have today, and failing to take the current deal.
And by saying that, do you mean that the concern being years from now that the money could just run out, or is that a relevant concern for the people in the plan now if it's not?
I think it's in everyone's interest to have a sustainable plan. Today, the plan is not sustainable. When I took office, the pension cost was $40 million. Last year, it was $70 million. This budget year we're talking about now, which starts October 1, is $110 million. 10 years from now, it's projected to be $260 million. That's about a 550% increase over that period of time. That's unsustainable. And I think it's in everyone's interest, the beneficiaries of the plan, but also the taxpayer to have something that's sustainable. And the poster child of this is certainly San Diego, where they had a pension program that ran amok, and it put the entire city at risk. And everything had to be reset. And while we're not there yet, failure to address this, I think, could lead to a similar story.
Mm-hmm. And with pensions, you have so many employees in City Hall that are members of the three main pensions, but often police and fire kind of becomes the lightning rod or is put into the public.
That's where all the money is. I mean, if you look at the three funds, you got police, fire, and general employees. The unfunded liability today, which is about $1.2 billion with a B, resides primarily in police and fire. These are high-risk designations, and that's where a lot of the benefits reside, quite frankly.
Yesterday we were talking about arts and culture and their place in sort of the social fabric of the community, business development, tourism, and everything. How do you think having a strong public safety, police, fire, how does that help develop business in Jacksonville?
Do you want to move your business or your family to a city that leads the state in murder? That's the very simple question. And I think over time, if we do not change the course of this pattern, we will become an unattractive economy because we're known as being violent and risky. Businesses want predictability. They want good quality of life for their families. And they want to be in a community that believes in itself enough to invest and solve problems. Failure to raise this millage will represent a divesting of this in this community. And how do you sell a community that doesn't believe in itself enough to invest when we're trying to talk people into coming here, yet we don't believe in the future enough to at least hold status quo the services we provide today?
Even without the millage increase, though, I thought police and fire were two areas that were pretty much off the table.
I have taken them off the table. Now, remember, off the table means status quo. Mm-hmm. We're not growing it. And you can build a case that we're still the cheapest in this service. But we're not advocating that we increase it. We're just advocating status quo. And that's right. I do not advocate or support the notion of trimming either one of these functions of government.
There are counties that have a certain part of the millage dedicated to fire service. What would there be, just to kind of long-range sustainability, would there be an idea to do something like that in Jacksonville?
It's just basically simply a taxing district that allocates money to that function. I don't support the notion of that, and the reason is I think it's healthy to have dollars competing. Public safety needs to compete with parks and public works and all these things continuously. I think it should always be a priority, but to have a designated funding source, I think, says to the unions, have at it. Here's the money. How do you negotiate effectively when you have a dedicated funding source in a union environment? So I think having the challenge each year of making this budget balance with everybody at the table makes it easier to negotiate competitively union contracts.
And as far as tourism goes, having a good public safety sector in the city, how do you think that reflects in the visitors that come to the city?
Are you going to want to stop in a city that has a violence problem? I mean, are you going to want to stop here and take advantage of a cultural experience or a sports entertainment opportunity if you think it's dangerous? And I think we recognize we have a problem. We're trying to deal with it. I don't think we've been labeled externally as a violent place, but with time that'll happen, unless we change the trajectory of this problem. And I think with the investments of Jacksonville Journey, the increasing of police presence with Operation Safe Streets and the sheriff's efforts, we're making a difference. I think we have a state attorney that I think the criminal element is taking seriously. I think we have a sheriff that is increasing presence. We have a city that is backing prevention and intervention, where we're engaging at-risk youth at an unprecedented level for the first time in a major way. We've always been engaged, but not in a major way. We've got wonderful not-for-profit communities that provide a backdrop of opportunities for kids that allow us to transfer values and to engage in constructive, productive activities versus roaming the streets and wreaking havoc. So there's a story here, and the story is this city recognizes the problem. We're on a path to fix it. Let's not take our foot off the gas and stop funding this government as we try to solve major problems that are what we call barriers to our future.
You'd mentioned Operation Safe Streets. Mm-hmm. That's an issue the sheriff talks a lot about. The $4 million invested into police overtime, and he feels was monumental in trying to reduce violence in the city. And I'm wondering if that logic holds up, it would tend to reason that the more money you'd spend on public safety, the less of a problem you'd have. Or do you think it's that easy?
Let's talk about the overtime, because I know there were a lot of interest over our overtime spending. The overtime spending on police presence was not a surprise, and it was not a result of mismanagement. Basically, we said in last year's budget, because it takes 11 months to train a police officer, we're going to invest in overtime on the streets today to increase presence, to change this pattern of crime and violence in our community. So we did run up overtime intentionally. It was planned. Only because there's an 11-month training period. So we were hiring officers, putting them in training, and then deploying them. So overtime will go down as our officer count goes up. And the same with corrections. We had a lot of overtime positions in corrections, primarily because we didn't want to raise the number of employees required. And now with a detailed analysis, we're saying, look, it is actually cheaper to have full-time positions in these fixed positions and get rid of the overtime obligation. So we're working through that. But I think, there were insinuations that the overtime was a result of mismanagement and lack of oversight. It was actually planned from the very beginning.
Is there help on the way with the federal COPS program, the COPS grant program?
I'm going to let Carrie Stewart talk about that, because she's actually made application for COPS money, and she's been instrumental in steering the Jacksonville Journey and the oversight committee with the Jacksonville Journey. And Carrie, back to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor. The COPS program, as you may or may not know, is a part of the stimulus package, and it allows for investment by the federal government in increasing the number of police officers, primarily in large urban counties like Duval County. The Sheriff's Office made application to the federal government through the stimulus plan for 120 new officers to be deployed over the next 3 years. What we have since found from the Department of Justice is that they are going to cap the number of awards per city to 50, either through some formula for smaller counties that will be a lesser number, but not to exceed 50 no matter how big you are. So our hope is that we will see a 50 person or 50 officer award from the federal government. The Jacksonville Journey has agreed to invest 40 more new officer positions in the next fiscal year, and quite honestly, we weren't very sure how we were going to pay for 40 new officers. The tally for 40 new officers and some corrections is about $6 million in the Journey's budget. The COPS funding will be integral to actually allowing us to reach that number. Right now, we don't know how we would pay for 40 new officers if not for federal funding.
I think Tia has a reader question.
Oh, yes, we have lots of reader questions, so I'll just start at the top. Mike asks, what is the plan for public safety if the millage does not pass? What will suffer?
Well, it's a good question, and I think the challenge we have is this. I can make a list of what I think suffers, but everyone's list is different because it's based on your priorities. What we know is this. If we take public safety off the table, which I would advocate we do, we're left with about 32% of the government that covers everything else, from public works to parks to recreation, community centers, almost everything we do. So I think what happens is we then start to determine who the winners and losers are. And there would be very, very intense competition with a lot of advocacy groups making their case for why their particular cause shouldn't be cut. All bets are off. And what my message to the community is this. These are the things that are on the table. What actually wins and loses, I don't know. But be on notice. There will be a chopping block. Everything will be on it. And if it proves like it has in past councils, they'll be up till 3, 4, 5 in the morning, not thinking clearly, whacking away. And who's to say what gets cut and what doesn't? And the challenge we have is we have yet to see a plan coming out of council. And granted, it's early. We have not seen a plan on how they intend to balance this budget. And until they have one and they share with this community what they plan to cut, I think it borders on irresponsibility to say you're going to cut without telling us what you're going to cut. And so what I'm encouraging is, look, I put a plan on the table. It's a 3-part plan that I think responsibly steers us through a crisis. What is your plan? What is your plan, and how does it shape this community? And the cuts that we'd have to experience out of the $50 million we'd be looking for, where do those occur, and what does Jacksonville look like after you've done it?
There was an alternative plan to the millage increase to trim, I think it was $3 million out of Jacksonville Journey funding. How would that particular trimming hurt police presence?
I'll let Carrie answer any incremental movement in Journey. I'm going to let Carrie address.
I think addressing the Jacksonville Journey, a $3 million hit would have to be spread over multiple programs. So, like the mayor has stated, which programs you would go after sort of lies at the feet of the council at this point. We have proposed for the Journey an almost $20 million budget for next year, down from $31 million last year. The bulk of that is police, so it's $6 million for police. The remainder is the $13.6 million that are for all of these different programs. So a $3 million hit to that would hit children's programs, it would hit prevention programs, it would hit intervention programs. So not knowing exactly what that hit would be, it would be difficult to tell you. The Journey is a package. It is a whole. So without going in and dissecting specifically which programs you wish to cut, it would be difficult to say.
We spend, a lot of money with after-school programs, which I think is some of the best dollars we invest. We spend a great deal of money with suspension center, out-of-school suspension centers. We spend money with summer camper programs, so kids have something constructive to do, and that's the scholarship basis to go to camp. We spend money on early literacy because we know helping kids learn early the basic tenets of reading helps direct their course, because it's the best predictor for how far a student goes in school and what kind of job they get and even whether they commit a crime. There's after-school programming, parks programming, code compliance, the DART program, where we actually go in and condemn and even maybe tear down drug houses. We have $500,000 dedicated to that. Ex-offender reentry issues. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of things that Journey, and again, these were not my suggestions. These were the suggestions of a 150-member committee of citizens in our community that I charged with saying, look, we've got a problem that we need to solve. What do you think we should do? And they put it in 3 buckets: prevention, intervention, and enforcement. And the programs we're funding now are direct recommendations from that committee's work. I think they're good recommendations. I think we're on the right track. Early indication tells me that we're starting to turn the tide on violence, with the murder rate being down 22% this year. I would hate to see us take a step back, particularly with a program that's in its infancy that's showing great progress.
Okay. I want to turn for a moment to fire and rescue. Dan, I noticed in the budget coming out next year that the capital outlay has gone from $1.2 million to $351,000. Looks like a pretty significant drop. I'm just wondering what was in that capital outlay and why is that going down so much?
Essentially, what you'd be looking at there is equipment. We're simply going to do a little bit less replacement than we had planned before. In large part, the budget goes up approximately $12 million or 8%.
The overall budget?
The overall budget for the Fire and Rescue Department, which is an indication, I think, of the strong support from the administration, from the mayor, for the Fire and Rescue Department. But we've had to be as lean as we possibly can. We keep squeezing and squeezing, trying to get the best service delivery that we can with the smallest amount of dollars.
But remember this, when we talk about a department budget going up, employee benefits and employee-related expenses are up 25%, and he is running a labor-intensive operation. So the increase you're seeing is in employee-related expenses. So that's what's driving the increased numbers. It's not that we're adding that much personnel or that many more facilities. Our goal is status quo, basically. But the driver on this is employee-related expenses. Employer-provided benefits are up 25%. It represents $47 million of this budget.
And that's essentially a $10 million increase from the previous year.
Right.
And that's almost exclusively pension.
It's almost exclusive. Okay. But with health benefits, do your health benefits cost any more because of the nature of the work that the guys are doing?
No, the health benefits are the same for fire and rescue employees as they are for other employees in the government.
But there are high-risk provisions in the pension that do trigger benefits that other employees don't get. So while it may not be represented in the typical health package that every city employee gets, on the pension side, because they're high-risk designation, there is a cost associated.
For example,
with
there
that.
would be higher costs for disability pension in the police and fire pension system than there would be in the other pension system or available to other employees.
Mm-hmm. How has the workload gone up, gone down as the county has spread out? I know that the building materials that people use, it's made it easier to sustain a fire in a newer home than it is some of the older ones. But as the county's grown, has it given you more work, less work, or how has the workload shifted?
For starters, remember that in excess of 80% of the emergency calls that we receive are for medical emergencies. They're a call for a rescue unit. They're because of a heart attack. They're a traffic accident. They are some kind of medical emergency. In large part, the statistics regarding those calls simply track the population. As the population is larger, there are more citizens who call. Our calls for service continue to go up every year. They continue to maintain a ratio of approximately 80% rescue, but the number of calls do go up. Proportionately, we have less of an amount of calls for fire-related events. Now, you can still have a very large fire, such as we had with the Humane Society fire a couple of years ago, that can take an incredible amount of resources. But the calls for service continue to go up, and in large part they are reflective of the increase in population.
Mm-hmm. With those calls going up, your transportation grid is getting a little bit more crowded. How does that hurt response times?
Essentially what happens is that unless we are able to add additional units, unless we're able to add additional stations, the response time tends to be static or to worsen a little bit. I think you hit the issue right on the head. As traffic congestion is greater, our response time is up slightly. We are in the business of responding, and time is the single greatest variable that we face in the service that we provide. If we can get there soon enough, a kitchen fire stays a kitchen fire and doesn't become a house fire. A cardiac arrest simply becomes a cardiac arrest instead of a fatality. We do not meet the national standards that are in existence today. We hope to be able to continue to improve, but as the population grows, we need to simply be adding resources to keep pace.
And I think a lot of times when you see the guys with the boots out on the road, your public donations to try and help keep the departments running and operating, have those been up or down in this economy?
Well, those public donations that you see in the boot drive, that's essentially for a charity. Our employees donate their time to collect funds for muscular dystrophy. which is an important charity commitment that employees of the Fire and Rescue Department make. What we see is simply a need for a continuing funding level to be able to meet the needs to expand. Over time, and it's part of a 10-year plan, we hope to add additional fire stations, additional rescue units.
It's some interesting statistics, and I'm just reading some of the notes that I have here. We receive nearly 130,000 calls a year in this fire department. It's pretty phenomenal when you talk about the volume. 80% of those are rescue. And remember this, everyone in the department is an EMT. So when you see a fire truck at a medical incident, there are EMTs on that truck, and they may be using that fire truck as a way to get there, but everyone in the department is trained for emergency medical. Interestingly enough, we get to calls in the urban area less than 6 minutes and 44 seconds. Arguably, we are not meeting national standards, but 90% of the time we get there within 6 minutes and 44 seconds. If you start diminishing this department and you take people away from it, it's a labor-intensive business. I mean, all the budget really is tied up in people. You start reducing the number of people, I think you impact that in a negative way, and you move further away from the national standards that we try to meet every day. But listen, I'm proud of our fire department. We have men and women that put themselves in harm's way every day, trying to keep this community safe, and I think the notion of trimming their budget is unthinkable.
T has another reader question.
And I'm going to couple some of these together because, Mr. Kleeman, there's just, different people are looking at fire department expenditures and wondering if you've thought of certain ways to cut money. For example, Lee asks, why is it necessary for the fire department to have 2 mobile command units, one paid for by a government grant, one funded by taxpayers? They should sell the one paid with taxpayers' dollars and put that money back in the budget. Then Lee also asks, why doesn't the fire department turn the training academy over to FCCJ and allow them to run it full time? Numerous instructors have been added over the past 2 years, and so that's another way. So I would just say, have you looked at those 2 suggestions and maybe any more where it comes to finding a way to reduce costs?
Well, let me say we continue to look at different ways that we can keep our costs low. We continue to look at our staffing and deployment patterns. We continue to look at the alignment of all of our resources in the department. Particularly, we have some equipment that we are very, very happy to have that we don't use very frequently. Equipment that is used for a major event such as Berkman Plaza or the T2 explosion and subsequent fire, or used in a hurricane. But we think it's very important to have that kind of capacity to be able to respond well. In terms of training issues, we actually have what I think is a very effective partnership arrangement right now with Florida State College.
Florida State College.
FCCJ.
Well,
whatever the new
they've
name
changed
is.
their name, Dan.
Florida
It's Florida State College. You're right.
Florida State College at Jacksonville. Thank you. We, in fact, operate out of their facilities. We have a partnership agreement where they provide some support. We provide employees. We think it's a very good mix of resources from the college and resources from the department that meet the needs for training.
And when you talk about a mobile unit, Tia, I think it's important to recognize that's a one-time expenditure. And many of those acquisitions are done with grants. Our challenge with the department is the reoccurring expenses. Remember, this is a labor-intensive business. So it's the cost of the people that really drives the budget challenge, not the one-time capital expenditures. Even if we could sell that mobile unit today, it would not be a game changer in our budget. The reoccurring labor cost that really drives the challenge.
Something in excess of 85% of the entire fire and rescue department is related to personnel costs or benefits.
Okay, you want me to ask another one?
Mm-hmm.
You can say that. Okay, let's see here. We got some questions about pension. Let's see here. The pension, okay. It says the pension, and you can respond to this, Mayor Peyton. Ron says the pension has nothing to do with the budget. It's totally separate.
Really?
So, and he asked you to respond to that. So maybe there's some things you could clear up. He's basically saying the pension doesn't really have an impact on the current budget crisis.
Really? That's a news flash to me. When I balance a budget, I have a line item called pension. And it's gone up. When I took office, it was $40 million. Last year it was $70 million. This year we're budgeting for is $110 million. 10 years from now it's projected to be $260 million. It is an absolute line item under employee-provided benefits, a line item on the expense.
Maybe Ron means pension reform won't affect.
Oh, well, maybe
Mayor.
that's right. Maybe that's the question. Pension reform. That's right. Pension reform will not impact the budget next year, and will barely impact the budget the year after that. It's basically a long-term savings that makes our pension plan sustainable. We know it will save close to $1.3 billion over the next 35 years. But you're right, and I think that might have been the question, Kerry. I think you're right. I think the challenge is that there's no short-term savings, but it's essential to do for the long-term health and viability of this city. It's the responsible thing to do. And I will tell you, it could be easy to kick this can down the road and not do it. It would be irresponsible to do that. And I think we're going to take the bull by the horns and do what's necessary, and I'm optimistic it'll happen.
Okay, let's see here what else we have. The same, they're going back to the matrix study, and you can, and maybe this might be getting into the weeds that you can't answer, but there have been a couple of questions about how the sheriff spends its money. And Marilyn asks, you can't control how the sheriff spends his money, but has your office looked at his budget so you feel comfortable that the money you've given him is being used in the best interest of taxpayers? And I'm going to add on, Matt said about the matrix study that the mayor, it suggested that the sheriff's office change some positions so that there's civilians at the desk instead of a sworn officer, so you could save money. So the
and
question
put more
is,
officers on the street.
Put more officers on the street. So I guess from both of Marilyn and Matt, how do you determine if the sheriff is doing the best?
I think what I have to look at as mayor is this. What is the officer to population ratio? What is our expenditure per citizen on the sheriff's department? Are we out of check? What is our murder rate? What is our violence rate? Are we out of check? I think we also have to say, have we seen exponential growth in this department? When you strip out of this department pension, healthcare related costs, and the additional officers we put in as a result of Jacksonville Journey, this is a no growth or actually a lesser department than before. Remember, the sheriff's office is the biggest part of our budget. It is labor intensive, so we have more labor burden and more employee cost related costs in this particular segment of our budget than anywhere else. So to say that it is, a lot of people say, well, it's grown by such and such over the years. You've got to strip out the things that the sheriff doesn't control. You've got to strip out pension. You've got to strip out health care. And the officers that we're adding were as a result of an in-depth community study to add 40 officers. So you have to peel it back. So when I do that, when I look at the community ratios of officers to people, the cost per person on officers, the murder rate, and whether we've really been experiencing growth as a result of inefficiencies and increased staffing, really not the case. It's really all about employee-related expenses that are driving the costs. Good questions.
Okay, more?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Someone, and this is a question I think that people are starting to ask, as you look at the budget and you talk about Journey and its effects, Judy Wheeler asks, I particularly would like the detailed data, and she asks about data for the out-of-school suspension centers, and she gets into some data about the school system, but, crime rates, graduation rates. So she asked for things about the school system that I know that you really have no control over, but it kind of goes to the fact of when or how can people feel confident that, and David also asked a similar question, the Journey Oversight Committee has been meeting about, metrics and measurements.
Right.
When do people feel confident that Journey is working?
I'm gonna let Carrie Stewart answer this question in detail, but I think if we can't measure it, we probably need to rethink whether we're doing it or not. And that is why we put in place the Oversight Committee, made up of volunteers, citizens in this community that are close to the challenges, close to the Jacksonville journey, to establish the metrics to say, look, are we measuring it? Is it moving the needle to make Jacksonville safer, or is it not? If it's not, we probably should redeploy those dollars. If it is, we probably should do as much, if not more. So, but Carrie actually staffs those oversight committee meetings. She can speak to it in more detail.
I think there are a couple of things that citizens can look forward to in terms of metrics and measurements from the Jacksonville journey. First, I think it's very important to understand that the funding really did not start hitting the street until January of this year. So we have 3/4 of a year worth of data that we're going to be trying to figure out as we go into the next fiscal year of, was it the right expenditure? Are we getting the best bang for our buck? The second thing that is important to note is that next week the Jacksonville Journey Oversight Committee meets on Thursday afternoon, and they will be reviewing what will essentially be their first year annual report. It will be a report to the community on what we've done in our first year in terms of expenditures, and as well as what have they gotten for those expenditures. The first year is going to be very quantitative in nature. How many dollars did we spend? How many children did we serve? How many ex-felons did we serve? How many lunches did we serve? So it's going to be very quantitative in nature. The third thing, and I think that the Oversight Committee is bullish on this, is how do we know that it's making a difference? And I think that gets to the crux of the question. Not just did we spend the dollars appropriately, and did we feed a certain number of children? Did we run a certain number of camps? But what does that mean in terms of its correlation to violent crime? Dr. Michael Hallett, who is the chair of the Criminal Justice Department at University of North Florida, is an ex officio member of the Jacksonville Journey Oversight Committee. He will be taking his entire graduate level class for the fall of this year to study in depth all of the quantitative measures that we have been collecting thus far and move those to a more qualitative answer to that question. So we can show you that the money has been spent appropriately. We can show you the exact output of what the money has been spent for. But we will spend the fall taking a look at this first 6 months to 9 months of data to turn it into that qualitative answer. Are we making a difference, truly?
Would you say that the bigger challenge is in finding the appropriate programs and programming levels, or finding the money itself to fund all these operations?
I think the former more than the latter. The mayor proposed, and the city council was very generous in allowing us to start this program, and we're hopeful that it will carry forward in the second year. So the funding is not as big an issue as figuring out what balance of programs, whether they're intervention, prevention, or deterrence, are going to help us get to that tipping point of violent crime. So I think the challenge is really that right mix of programs with children, adolescents, and ex-offenders, as well as the right balance of deterrence in these challenged areas. So the former rather than the latter.
Much of that $30 million that was put into Jacksonville Journey was for capital improvements and capital expenses. I think it was $10 million. What is the status of that money right now? What has it been used for, or what will it be used for?
It's primarily been used for two things. To consider it two buckets. One of them has been for completing town centers and our challenged neighborhoods, which may seem like a non sequitur when you're talking about crime prevention, but it's eliminating blight and creating inviting environments for commercial activity in some of these challenged neighborhoods. Very small piece of that was to complete some of those town centers. The bulk of it will be spent this year and next year in addressing our gaps in our community centers, again in our challenged neighborhoods first, and then we will go out from there. So it's capital projects that are upgrading, retrofitting, renovating, and expanding city-owned facilities for use of youth and after-school activities. So the bulk of that has happened in our parks, in our community centers, in retrofitting, renovating, and expanding. And I think what we will have from our Parks and Recreation Department is what exactly they've spent it on and what they plan to spend it on for the next year. That's going to be a very important part of our capital program in terms of how the City Council looks at how we spent those capital dollars.
Do we have any other readers that want to?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, there's a public safety question from Bella. Is there a plan to move some of the shelters out of downtown? I'm assuming she's asking about homeless shelters. We should be focused on improving the downtown area for conventions, tourism, and business development. We have too many homeless centers in this area. Can we move the Greyhound bus station? I've heard
Yeah.
crime stories about this
Yeah.
center.
I think it's an excellent question that Bella asks, and I think long term we really have to find out what we want for our downtown. I'm more optimistic about moving the bus station than I am about moving homeless shelters. And the challenge we have with homeless shelters, not only is it enormously expensive, the capital cost up front to move them, the question is finding a community that will embrace them. Can you imagine if we proposed coming to your neighborhood with a homeless shelter, the outcry and protest that you would hear? Did we make a mistake long-term in the planning of the location of these facilities? Probably so. I don't think it was an intentional effort to say we're going to put all homeless downtown, but at the time, it seemed the logical place to be, and there was probably no objection because there were so few residents downtown, only workers. So if we could wave a wand, we probably would put them in a less prominent location in an area we're trying to revitalize. But it's a real challenge. It's an expensive challenge, and the political hurdles of finding a community that will embrace these homeless shelters is even more challenging. Carrie, you're more of our homeless expert. Do you have
I
anything
would
you want to
also
add?
add that most of these centers, with the exception of the Sulzbacher Center, are ran by nonprofit agencies. So there's very little government intervention or interaction with these facilities. So the Sulzbacher Center is the city's homeless shelter, for lack of a better term. We do provide a great deal of funding for them. But most of the other shelters that are downtown are privately ran or faith-based ran. So we would run into that challenge as well. We don't have a lot of say-so over their siting or their funding. But that being said, we do understand that it's a challenge.
It's a challenge. Yeah.
Those of us who live and work downtown, we see it on a daily basis as well. And the mayor alluded to the Greyhound station as well. That has been in the works for many years. There was actually money set aside several budgets ago before Mayor Peyton came into office to move the Greyhound bus station. And it simply has not been a cost-effective move for Greyhound.
With the taxpayer would have to pay for it, basically.
That's right.
The Greyhound is not
They are
volunteering
happy
to
where they
pay, and they will only be happy if we improve the facility and make it even better than it is today in another location, completely at the taxpayer's expense. But not saying we shouldn't do it, but finding dollars for that capital expenditure has been a real challenge.
And the long-term plan for Greyhound is the Regional Transportation Center that the JTA has proposed right now, which would be in the west end of La Villa, butting up to 95.
And I think that's a good location, right up next to 95, where you're probably not going to see any residential development, right up against the interstate, right near your Skyway, right near where you could bring taxis and a bus terminus, and maybe someday high-speed rail and even the train station back to Prime Osborne. So long-term, I think the notion of a hub there makes a lot of sense.
I think we have time for one more reader question.
Okay, I'm fascinated by the Greyhound unit. Okay. There are, let's see who's asking this question. Mike asks, there are areas of town that are in need of better rescue response along with police protection. And I'm assuming he's talking about some of these new growth areas that are more rural. Just now, maybe the infrastructure isn't in place, such as the north side or the west side. How is that going to be handled? I know it's a money issue, but still, is there a plan for how the rescue and police departments grow in these new growth areas?
Well, I mean, Dan can better answer this, but we have a process called the Tri-Data Study that gives us a quantitative analysis on where we need coverage. And, of course, the challenge is the rural areas, agricultural land that's being converted now to houses, and the demand and pressure it's putting on our services in those areas. We have been expanding in these areas, probably not at the rate that we're experiencing the growth, and that is a dollar issue, obviously. And police services the same way. But, Dan, if you want to elaborate on that further.
Certainly the next several stations that are identified, all of which would include rescue units, are in the Argyle Forest area, in the area of Interstate 95 South near the Baptist Medical Center, and in the St. John's Town Center, all areas that not so many years ago were rural and today are very, very urban.
Very good. Well, I think that's time. We had some great reader questions today. And thanks for joining us. We're going to do this again Friday at noon, where the subject will be city staffing and city employees and payroll. I'm David Hunt. Thanks to Tia Mitchell, Jason Pratt, Jonathan Bennett, and, of course, Mayor John Peyton, Dan Kleeman, and Carrie Stewart. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.